I'm Mel Stooks. I'm head of the youth team at GT Stewart. So this means that I specialise in representing young people, and I also represent some older people who are considered to be mentally disordered defendants. I'm also a normal duty solicitor, so I go to police stations out of hours and represent anybody who needs us as well. Well, on a very real level, when Covid-19 came in and the furlough was introduced, many of my colleagues and people at other firms were furloughed, and so there were far fewer people to cover what seemed to be as much work. We didn't see any reduction in crime or levels of need. So there were fewer of us doing it. It was longer hours, but then on a practical level, police stations became virtual, so you would do it either over the telephone or via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. You would only really attend police stations if it was a young person in the police station or if it was a particularly serious offence. Of course, court hearings became virtual as well, and that was regardless of whether or not it was a young person in custody or even someone with mental health problems. Well, the virtual hearings have caused a great deal of concern because it became very evident that some defendants had no idea what had happened via the virtual court and had no real understanding that they had been in a court and something had happened. And that wasn't just to do with their mental health and understanding, that was obviously to do with technological issues as well. For instance, where you had defendants who were displaying signs of COVID, the laptop would be taken to the cell wicket, and obviously sound wouldn't transfer through those doors. Another real issue is, of course, the delay. For people on bail, there is many months passing between the incident and the first appearance at court. For young people, that obviously means they've lost the connection between what's happened and why they are in court. And of course, this is a system that's already riddled with delays because of the changes of release under investigation and lack of funding, with the Crown Courts not performing. But these delays have obviously worsened with COVID. And of course, one of the worst effects is on the young people in custody. So they, if they go in person, they're subject to a 14-day isolation period when they return. They are people who can't have legal visits in person. They've only really been allowed telephone contact. And if you're a young person in the criminal justice system, the chances of you experiencing communication difficulties anyway are quite high. And so telephone and video links aren't really a very good way of communicating. It's very good in terms of young people did receive some extra funding in order to be able to call their lawyers. But I have a young client, for instance, who's been remanded in youth detention accommodation since April. And I still haven't met him. I've seen him once over a video link, and I've spoken to him quite regularly, but he's pleading not guilty at the Crown Court to a fairly serious offence. And because there's a large number of co-defendants, many of whom are on bail, no one can actually tell him when his trial is going to be, and that's causing a great cause of concern. And of course, if I move on slightly to the ones who are just tipped over the edge of 18, they're not even getting the extra funding to contact their solicitors. So I have a young adult who has mental health problems. He's been in a young offenders institution since the start of the year. I last had contact with him in February before COVID caused the lockdown. And it wasn't until July that I managed to get to speak to him again. His trial was due to take place, another multi-handed case. It was due to take place in June of this year. And again, that's now been pushed back until 2021. And so, yes, I think it's the delay, and particularly for those in custody, that are the worst hit. I can't think of any particular innovation, but if I was going to come up with something, it would be the improvement on hygiene in the lower courts. We finally have access to soap again. I think, unfortunately, the increased use of the cloud video platform, the CVP courts, do look likely to stay. I think that people are considering the convenience of not transporting prisoners from police stations to court, but they're not really weighing up the delays caused by this. For instance, there are delays in obtaining papers, having to wait in a queue to speak to your client over a telephone in a custody area, which isn't necessarily private and confidential, and getting instructions in those situations are quite difficult. And getting other agencies engaged is also quite difficult. So whilst I do think that unfortunately they are here to stay, I don't think that's a particularly good thing. One thing that did come out of the COVID and the youth courts not sitting regularly was, during the height of lockdown, the prosecution were reviewing particularly the youth court cases much more rigorously. And if you sent representations to them, then you were more likely to get it reviewed for an out-of-court disposal, or consider whether or not it was in the interest of justice to even proceed. And I think it would be very good if we could keep the momentum up there, because it did really mean that only the really serious cases have been kept in the court system as a result of that. I think funding is very, very simply the easy answer. We need to be able to open up more courtrooms so that we can get more work processed. The Crown Court backlog was bad enough before COVID. It is now. The figures are horrendous, and if we could get more money put into the system, then I think it will become more efficient and the backlog would ease.